So now we've discussed how to SEO optimize your web content, and we've discussed how to SEO optimize your web page. So now let's discuss how to SEO optimize your web site. Let's learn about the SEO principles that apply to the website in its entirety. First, let's talk about URLs and file folders. How should you organize your URLs and file directory structure? There used to be a surprising amount of debate about this, and sometimes you will encounter people using very elaborate subfolders. Their URLs would look something like this. In this example, we're looking at the URL of a page on a woodworking website and assume they were selling a birdhouse hobby kit. So you'd see a very wordy file folder structure like this: woodworking.com/pine/hobby/bird/medium-size/how to build a birdhouse.html. So it was argued that having these keywordy file folders somehow earned you SEO points. And there probably was some element of truth to that. But these days, the debate is pretty much over. Brevity in the URL is typically considered paramount. You should generally just render your URLs like this: domain name /slug. That's it. Just the website's domain name, for example, wikihow.com, then the slash, then the web page slug, build a birdhouse. Recall that the word slug is just an abstraction that typically identifies the file of the web page itself. And remember, you do indeed want to make sure you get your article's main keywords into the slug. Build and birdhouse are obviously important keywords here. But point being, you typically want your URL architecture to be as simple as possible. wikihow.com is a good example of this. Check out these 3 example web pages from their site. How to build a bench, how to build a birdhouse, how to build a bar stool. These are very simple URLs. wikihow.com/build a bench, wikihow.com/build a birdhouse, wikihow.com/build a bar stool. Nice and simple. 9 times out of 10, this is the URL arrangement you'd probably want to use. But there are a couple possible retorts to this URL schema. Retort number 1, seek time. An interesting technical issue comes up in URLs when you're dealing with database-driven content management systems like WordPress. Basically, it is easier for a computer to find a database row based on an integer than based on a string of characters. So, for example, in contrast with wikihow.com, let's look at this equivalent web pages over at ehow.com. How to build a bench seat, how to build a birdhouse, how to make wooden bar stools. Pretty much the same content topics, but let's compare the URLs. Notice how aesthetically undesirable the bottom URLs at ehow.com look. Ehow has placed these integer values in their URLs. Why do they do that? Most likely because it improves website performance. It decreases the amount of work that their server has to do when it searches for an article in their content database. Because, again, it's easier for a computer to find a database record based on an integer than based on a text string. Now, I just mentioned this phenomenon briefly here for training purposes. Purportedly, this was more of an issue in the early days of WordPress, but unless you have a website with several thousand articles, you're probably not going to have to worry about this issue much. But this is one common retort to using simple URLs. Now, retort number 2, what about the silo architecture? A common retort you'll see to the simple file folder architecture we've described is from people who are still proclaiming the virtues of a, quote, silo architecture. I still get emails about this question every month. There seems to be significant confusion out there about what a silo architecture is, and even in the SEO community, there doesn't seem to be one definition that everyone agrees upon anyway. Silo architectures are often confused with link wheels, which is another dated SEO concept. But briefly, a silo architecture is a system of organizing and interlinking the web pages on your site to maximize SEO value. You can see in this slide here, the web pages are arranged into unique logical categories. And silo architecture schemas have various rules for how one might link up each web page. Often they have more ridiculously elaborate rules than this one. But in any case, you'll notice in our drawing how each category links to its subpages and how the 4th page links to the 1st page, etc. So supposedly, by parlaying the website's link juice into a circuitous route, then you are somehow, supposedly, sculpting an increased SEO value for your website. And some SEOs used to stress the necessity of using a wordy, complicated hierarchical file folder structure like this. allowing you to arrange your website into increasingly complex silos as your site got bigger and bigger. So again, this stuff typically isn't taken as seriously anymore. Silos are an artifact of the earlier days of web development, when content management systems weren't as prevalent, and when web developers had to manually create each folder, page, and link to all their content. These days, most of us use a CMS like WordPress, which has built-in categorization, tags, navigation menus, and these are created for you automatically. So a typical website these days will already be quite interlinked anyway. And complicating your efforts with elaborate linking architectures or elaborate subfolders like this is probably superfluous. Now let's move on to subdomains. This particular SEO concept probably won't apply to most site owners on the net. It typically only applies to very, very large websites. But if you understand the underlying theory, then it will aid in your understanding of site-wide SEO in general. So a perfect example of subdomain usage is over at about.com. About.com is an absolutely enormous content website. They have articles about pretty much everything. Here are some examples. Xbox games, learn the French language, investing for beginners. That's a pretty diverse range of niches. So you'll notice how the site has been divided into subdomains. Xbox.about.com, French.about.com, beginnersinvest.about.com. So why did they do that? Why did about.com divide their website up into subdomains? The quick answer is because Google treats subdomains different than subfolders. Content that is located in a subdomain, content before the period, is treated more like a unique website, a website that is at least partially independent of the main domain. This is important because there is a thematic component to gauging web page value. So consider our example website about doghouses. All of the pages on our site will, of course, be about a similar theme. Dogs, doghouses, dog training, dog schools, etc., etc. All of our documents here are thematically congruous. In raw theory, a document that is a member of a set of other thematically congruous documents may realize a higher SEO value than a document that existed within a cluster of documents that were merely about a hodgepodge of unrelated niches. In theory, if half our content was about the dog pet industry and the other half of our content was about the commercial salmon industry, then it's more difficult for Googlebot, and for people in general, to see our pages as an authority for one topic or the other. What would a guy who owned a dog training school and who sold doghouse construction ebooks know about the commercial salmon industry? He actually might know quite a lot about the salmon industry, but we would assume he doesn't. We would assume that such information wouldn't be resident on a puppy website. And this natural bias is probably comparable to the programmatic bias that Google uses as well. It would look very odd to see the websites of multi-million-dollar commercial fishing corporations linking to puppyplace.com as an authority on commercial fishing. In many ways, your domain name itself often comes to define the types of articles that your website will contain. Puppyplace.com probably has puppy stuff, not commercial fishing stuff. But when you have a very large website of a more general composition, like about.com, then it's easier to envision more disjunctive article topics. And so it probably makes good SEO sense for them to divide their content into these subdomains. But you will also notice that there are lots of large websites that don't bother with subdomains at the content level. WikiHow and Wikipedia don't bother with subdomains, and they obviously have massive amounts of disjunctive content. So this decision is also dependent upon other factors like the business model of the website and the type of CMS that runs the site. Now let's talk about no indexing. No indexing got a bit more attention in recent years following the big Google algorithm updates. So what is no indexing? The value no index appears in the robot's meta tag. It's just this little snippet of code that you put in your web page header if you don't want the page to appear in Google's search results. So why would you want to no index a web page? Why would you want a web page to not appear in Google? Well, there are a couple reasons. Reason number one, there's a pragmatic reason, a practical reason to do it. A very, very common example would be a circumstance in which you have a website owner who is giving away a free resource, often a small ebook, in exchange for his visitor's email address. So in our website here, we have a typical email opt-in box in our site sidebar. And if the website visitor types in his email address, then he'll get a link to the ebook download page. Now, our website owner does not want this download page to be listed in Google, because if his download page was listed in Google, then people might just search Google for the ebook page. Or even worse, random visitors might enter his website via his download page and not his homepage, bypassing his web content and pitch altogether. I see this happen a lot. This is a very, very, very common mistake. It's often very easy to find a website's, quote, hidden resources. These supposed hidden resources can often be found with just a couple Google searches. So, how would our website owner prevent this download page from appearing in Google's index? He'd simply place the no index code in the head tag of this page, and this directs Google to not place this page in their search index. So that's one reason to no index a web page, but more importantly for our purposes here, there is another reason. Reason number 2, the SEO reason. So here's the thing, you should no index any page that does not add value to the search experience of a Google user. So recall in the previous module when we talked about pogo sticking. If a user clicks on a web page from the Google search results, doesn't like what he sees, and comes right back to Google, then this is called pogo sticking. Pogo sticking is bad. If Google sees this happening, they'll devalue your page and perhaps eventually your entire website. So it is often the case that the website owner actually doesn't realize that he has lots of pages on his website that are simply not useful to a random visitor. This happens a lot in content management systems like WordPress, in which you might have hundreds of pages of auto-generated content like tag pages, category pages, and archive pages. We're looking at a tag page from the old WordPress default 2010 theme now. So let's take a look at this page. The tag is called flowers, and the title of this page is flowers, and the page's H1 tag is called tag archives : flowers. And then below there's a post snippet leading to a post entitled flowers in the yard. Now the question to ask yourself is this: what keyword should this web page be ranking for in Google? How much would this page add value to a person using Google to find stuff? If a person on Google typed in the word flowers and pressed enter, should Google send them to this tag page? So I think the answers to these questions are pretty clear. The tag page contains a hodgepodge of content related or semi-related to flowers, and Googlebot will most likely initially infer that it's a page about the keyword flowers. But if you were a person using Google and you typed in the keyword flowers, then do you think Google would be doing their job if they sent you to this page? I think the answer is no. Somebody who types the word flowers in Google probably wants to land on a page more like this. They want to see a bunch of flower pictures, or they want to order flowers online, or they want to find a local flower shop, or whatever. But they most assuredly do not want to find themselves on this flowers tag page. There are actually very few circumstances in which any given WordPress tag page at all adds any value to the search experience of a Google user. Remember, pogo sticking is bad. If Google sees a user looking for flower information, go to your webpage, not find anything useful, and come right back to Google, then that is bad. That's pogo sticking. And that is why such pages, like this tag page, should be set to no index. Auto-generated pages should almost always be set to no index in WordPress. Tag pages, category pages, archive pages. In my WordPress themes, I set all of these to no index. Now, these pages can have value in some circumstances. You may have a good reason to want to rank your category page, but you want to get used to scrutinizing over the question of whether or not the given page actually is of value to a random web visitor, somebody who just found your website cold via a Google search. So again, you should no index any page that does not add value to the search experience of a Google user. If you have pages on your site that are not likely to add immediate or obvious value to a human searcher on Google, then consider no indexing it. Okay, now let's talk about the canonical link element. What is the canonical link element and why is it important? Let's start with an example. On the left, we have a website with our example URL, puppyplace.com. And on the right, we have a website with the URL puppyplace.com/index.html. Now, to our eyes, we can see that this website is rendering the same homepage for both URLs, because web servers are designed to request the index.html page by default. So you typically don't need to type index.html after the slash here. But recall that Google works by assigning a page rank value to every URL on the internet. Meaning, in Google's eyes, the page on the left is a completely different web page than the page on the right. And hence, if half of your fans in the world link to the homepage URL on the left, puppyplace.com, and if the other half of your fans in the world link to the homepage URL on the right, puppyplace.com/index.html, then in Google's eyes, you're actually splitting your homepage's incoming link value across two different URLs. These are two separate web pages in the eyes of Google. That's a problem. So this is why Google began to process the canonical link element several years ago. The canonical link element is just a snippet of code that tells Google which URL is your, quote, real URL. So all a website owner has to do is put a canonical link element code snippet into the header of his web page. And if he does that, then it doesn't matter what URL people are actually linking to, because the link juice will all be redirected to whatever URL is specified in the canonical href value. In this case, our website owner has typed in puppyplace.com here. So this bit of information represents one of the more damaging SEO mistakes you could have made on your website. Back in the day, when so many websites were designed with earlier versions of FrontPage or Dreamweaver, this mistake was actually the norm. This is how you would often link to your homepage. But fortunately, these days, given the prevalence of content management systems like WordPress, this problem is not as common as it used to be. WordPress does a pretty good job of bringing people back to the homepage URL. In any case, we can see how important it is to remain consistent in our website architecture and in our linking schema. Now, one aspect of site optimization that comes up a lot is the supposed importance of sitemaps. If you surf around on SEO blogs, you'll often find these articles entitled something like Top 10 SEO Tips. And one of the tips typically recommends adding a sitemap to your website, often via a WordPress plugin. So what do these sitemaps really do? What is a sitemap? It's just a boring text file. A sitemap is just an index of all the pages of your website. The original intent of sitemaps was to be sure that a bot, like Googlebot, can easily discover each individual page on your website. So the way a bot normally discovers pages on a website is similar to the way that you and I do. We just go to somebody's homepage and start clicking on links. A bot does the same thing. It meticulously visits each link on each page, and the layout of the website is eventually revealed. But if you have a page on your site and there are no other links pointing to it, then the bot, of course, can't get there. Notice this bottom web page in our slide. There are no links to it, so the bot will never know it exists. This is called an orphan. An orphaned web page is a web page with no discoverable links pointing to it. So again, what is a sitemap? A list of all your web pages. So even if the bot can't find this orphaned page by following links, it can, at least, check out your sitemap and find your orphan listed there. Now, with the widespread adoption of content management systems like WordPress, the whole orphaned pages concept is often no longer an issue. WordPress themes tend to quite readily link up all your web pages pretty well. But aside from that, the main thing to realize here is if you actually need a sitemap on your site, then there's a good chance you're doing something wrong. In other words, a properly SEO optimized website should already contain links to the pages that you want Google to find. If you actually have an orphaned page, then this isn't a sign that you need a sitemap. Rather, this is a sign that there is something wrong with the SEO on your website. You shouldn't have orphaned pages on your site anyway. If you have orphans, you should fix your on-page SEO. You should fix your navigational hierarchy and your website architecture. You should build links to the orphaned pages, not just put a band-aid solution over the problem by using a sitemap. I haven't bothered with sitemaps in years. There shouldn't be much of a need for them if you have already constructed a properly SEO optimized website.